Well, hello, folks. My name is Russ Gesch. I'm a research plant physiologist with the USDA ARS in Morris, Minnesota. And today I'm going to be talking about the agricultural management of these winter oilseeds, Pennycress and Camelina, and how we're integrating those into row cropping systems in the upper Midwest. Now, some of the work that I'm going to be showing you, discussing today is also done in collaboration with Dr. Scott Wells from the University of Minnesota. So he's also put a lot into our production today as well. So just as a quick overview of Pennycress and Winter Camelina as winter cover crops, cash cover crops, both belong to the mustard family. They're closely related to canola. And they're very cold tolerant, winter hardy. They survive our winters very well here in the upper Midwest. And they're highly resilient and highly adaptable. They have a rapid seed maturity. We plant them in the fall, they overwinter. When they come back up in the spring, they start growing very quickly. And the seed matures rapidly as well. And that's what allows us to do some double cropping work. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today, using a method called relay cropping. Winter Camelina and Pennycress, we see yields oftentimes 1,200 pounds per acre and higher than that. With Winter Camelina, we've seen yields as high as 2,000 pounds per acre. Both have a relatively high seed oil content of 36 to 42% by weight of their seed. Winter Camelina can be used for both food and industrial uses. It does have a heart-healthy oil that's high in unsaturated fatty acids, but it's balanced with a lot of vitamin E, which helps stabilize that oil, gives it better shelf life than, for instance, flax oil. And its oil, as well as Pennycress oil, can be used for making bioproducts, bioplastics, and advanced biofuels such as biodiesel as well. Now, what I call the gold star system, or what we've found works best for incorporating these winter oil seeds, is to come in and plant them after a short season summer annual crop. Particularly spring small grain cereals, spring wheat in particular, but oats too, barley. And there's some other crops that'll work quite well also that we've done research on, like sugar beets, corn if it's taken off for silage, peas, and sweet corn as well. So just in Minnesota alone, if we look at the number of acres that these winter oilseeds can impact in the immediate future, it's relatively high. There's over 2.5 million acres of these crops that I just mentioned growing here in Minnesota. And we're primarily targeting spring wheat growing areas. And those growers are very interested in these winter oilseeds. Now, I mentioned the double cropping biz, and we're using a technique called relay cropping. That's what we found works best. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of that, also an overview of the timeline of it, and then I'll talk more about specifics of how we're doing this relay cropping. But in this slide that I have shown here, in the pictures that I have, I'm going to be working from top to bottom, left to right. So as an overview, we're planting these winter oil seeds after, like I said, after a short season summer annual crop like spring wheat or silage corn. Once they're established, they're in a rosette form. The stems won't bolt and elongate until the following spring. So they overwinter as a rosette. Again, they have very good freeze tolerance. And then in the spring, they'll begin growing very soon. Sometimes, when the snow is just melting, they start growing. And it's not long before their stems begin to elongate. That's called bolting. And when the winter oil seeds are bolting, that's when we want to come in and interseed our soybean in between rows of winter camelina. Okay, and that generally is from late April to early May, so it corresponds nicely to when we typically plant soybean. After doing that, the winter oil seeds, like I said, they mature quickly. So they're flowering by mid to late May, beginning to set seed right away. And usually by anywhere from mid-June to early July, those oil seeds are ready to harvest. Pennycress comes off typically about a week to 2 weeks earlier than Winter Camelina. At that time, the soybean are quite short, and most of the seed is in the upper third of those winter oil seeds. So we can come over the top of the soybean and harvest those winter oil seeds, and then the soybean, of course, we manage as we normally would and harvest it in the fall later. This is what it looks like in early June. You can see the soybean in between the rows of Camelina, still quite small. Camelina in this case is pretty much done flowering, although it's, as you can see, setting seed, and it'll mature quickly after that. Just as a general timeline, and I'll talk more about some of the specifics of this, but to give you a general timeline of when we're doing these field operations. In the first year, when we're planting in the fall, for the relay system, we really like to get in by early to mid-September. That allows us to get that oilseed crop off earlier, which will benefit the soybean in the relay system to optimize its yield. We planted Winter Camelina all the way out to mid-October, just prior to soil freeze up. It germinates quickly. It has really good seedling vigor. And even if those plants are out of the ground and still small, they'll survive our winters. They have incredible freeze hardiness, every bit as good as winter rye, if not even a little bit better. Now, in the next year, in year 2, in the spring, the following spring, when those plants, when the winter oil seeds start to bolt, which, like I said, is usually late April to early May, that's when we want to get in there and plant soybean. Now, one of the techniques that's worked very well for us, and I'll talk a little bit more about this too later, is using a skip row planting technique for the winter oil seeds. We're planting them, well, it's best to plant them with a no-till type drill. And what we're doing is we're leaving a space open where we're not planting the winter oil seed that corresponds to the row spacing of the soybean that you'll be planting. Most of the work we've been doing and what we recommend is to use 30-inch soybean, but one can use narrower rows as well. And you just block the proper opening in the drill in order to get that skip row. Again, Camelina, we're harvesting that by late June to early July, and at that time the soybean are still quite small. And then after we get that off, we manage the soybean just like we would with our full season soybean and harvest that in late September to early October. Now, another thing I want to point out here too is that with the soybean in the relay system, we have found that cultivar matters. And what we're finding is that using a maturity group soybean, a maturity that's slightly longer than what we would use for normally use for a full season soybean in a given region, tends to work better in the relay system. Herbicide history is very important. So these are some of the herbicides, if they've been recently in the past 2 years, if they've been used in fields that you're thinking about putting these winter oil seeds, it's not a good idea to follow these herbicides if they've been used in the last 2 years. Now, I'm not going to go into detail of these. As you can see, there's several of them here. I'm not going to go into the details of the chemistry, but just to tell you that we do have a grower's guide that we've developed, and we continue to update that, and it's got all that information in there for that, as well as information about what herbicides Winter Camelina has tolerance to that can be used for weed control in Winter Camelina. Now, Winter Camelina is a broadleaf. It's a dicot, so it's the broadleaf weeds that we're most concerned about controlling. Most grass herbicides, it's very tolerant to. So we've used Post and Select. They work well. Camelina is very tolerant to them. A lot of our work has been done using, well, as you can see here, there's several pre-emergent and pre-plant herbicides that'll work with Winter Camelina. We've tended to use Sonalan and Treflan as pre-plant and incorporate those into the soil as we plant or before we plant our Camelina. But even a better recommendation than that is to wait until spring and use a pre-emergent such as Dual Magnum, Outlook, or Prowl, which if you spray those on before the weeds have emerged, but the Camelina, of course, has emerged, it's quite tolerant and won't hurt the Camelina. Another plus about Winter Camelina that we're finding is that where we get good stands of Winter Camelina, we also get very good weed suppression. So sometimes some of the farmers that have done some on-farm studies with us have not even had to use herbicide for weed control in Camelina, Winter Camelina. Crop residue can be a little bit challenging. We're currently doing a lot of work with corn and trying to incorporate these winter oil seeds into either interseed into or after harvesting corn. Residue does tend to be an issue, and as shown here in this graph that's in the slide, where we remove this, this is corn that's being harvested for grain. Where more stover is removed, up to 50% stover, our cover crop ground coverage is much better than when no stover is removed. Unfortunately, a lot of farmers these days are baling corn stover for bedding, livestock bedding, and livestock feed, and so on. Interseeding into standing corn, we've done a lot of that work, and it works well for getting establishment. But here again, when harvesting the corn for grain, the residue that's left behind can kind of suppress, when it falls on those cover crops, it can suppress their growth, and we don't get really good survival the following year and good productivity. As far as planting these winter oil seeds, Winter Camelina is a little bit more forgiving than Pennycress. Like I said, it has very good, vigorous germination, vigorous seedling growth. We recommend no-tilling it, but it can be planted in the tilled fields as well. And we've researched quite extensively both drilling and broadcasting the seed. And both can be used, but for Winter Camelina, drilling tends to be the better method. And you can go with a lighter seeding rate, 6 to 8 pounds, as opposed to broadcasting, where you need to use a higher rate because we don't get as good as establishment with broadcasting. Pennycress, interestingly, is almost the opposite. Sometimes we see better pennycress stands where we broadcast rather than drill seeding. And part of that is because it has to be seeded shallower than Winter Camelina. Winter Camelina is pretty forgiving. We recommend drilling at 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch deep, but if you're a little bit more, a little bit less, it doesn't seem to matter. And again, for the relay system, early to mid-September in our region of Minnesota and the eastern Dakotas tends to work the best. That enables us to get the winter oil seed off earlier, which helps the relay soybean to do better as well. Pennycress seeding, again, it has a little slower germination and emergence, so we have to go with a higher seeding rate there for both drilling and broadcasting. And seeding depth is really important there. It has to be very shallow and planted a little bit earlier than Winter Camelina too, just because of the slower germination and emergence. Now, I'm not going to say a lot about fertility, but I will talk a little bit about nitrogen. Nitrogen is very important. If you're growing Camelina and Pennycress as cover crops to uptake excess nitrogen, you're not going to want to put on too much additional nitrogen, but you really don't have to. Both really don't use all that much nitrogen, but we do find with Camelina to optimize yields, and that's what we want to do in this relay cropping system, is that it does need about 60 pounds per acre of nitrogen. So in fields that already have a lot of nitrogen there, you might not have to add much to it. But we do recommend that you get up to that 60 pounds per acre. And it's best to add that in the spring. The plants will use it. And adding it just before they begin bolting, before that stem begins elongating, is the best time to add that nitrogen. But it does definitely need some nitrogen to optimize yields. As far as planting the soybean, we're not looking at doing too much different with the relay soybean than a regular monocrop full season soybean, except for the fact that we're interseeding between rows of Camelina. Again, the skip row technique has worked best for us. You just get less competition of the two crops if you leave that skip row and plant your soybean into the skip row. And it just helps to optimize the soybean yield. And Camelina has, it's got very good yield compensation. So even with that missing row, we don't really see a drop in yields. The yields are fine. And the way we do this, again, is to block openers on our drill that correspond to that row spacing that you're going to be planting your soybean at. So in this picture I have shown here, the winter Camelina in this case was growing on 7.5 or 8 inch rows. And then every 4th row, we blocked either, with a piece of duct tape or something like that, block it so that you're not planting the winter oil seed in that row. And then you come back and drill your soybean into it. Plant population-wise, or seed population rather, for soybean, we're typically looking at 175 to 190,000 seed per acre. And planting that, like I said, you want to go by the growth stage of the Winter Camelina. But generally speaking, when it's bolting or after it begins bolting is when you want to relay plant your soybean, and that typically corresponds to late April, early May, when you would normally be planting soybean anyway. Now, with Winter Camelina, we have planted the relay soybean even after Camelina begins flowering, and doesn't seem to hurt its yield at all. It's very, very resilient. Not so with Pennycress. If Pennycress is already flowering and you haven't relayed your soybean yet, you may either want to whack it and just use it as a cover crop, or grow it as a monocrop and just go for the Pennycress seed, and then maybe double crop something after it. So, but with Camelina, we don't tend to have that problem. As far as harvesting the oil seeds, we recommend direct combining. Winter Camelina is pretty shatter resistant. It's generally like canola. So it can be direct combine harvesting. We recommend that for the relay system. It can be swathed too. If you're maybe looking at sequential double cropping or just growing it as a single crop, you can get it off about a week earlier by swathing. But we do recommend direct combining for the relay system. Harvesting that seed when it's at about 12% moisture, the seed is going to look reddish brown at that point, and the pods are going to be a light yellowish, light brown color at that time. And you should be able to easily break them open if you rub them in your hands. Harvest aids can be used, but obviously they need to be safe for soybean. So we have used glyphosate and glufosinate to help hasten the dry down of the camelina in the field. And that can buy you an extra few days to even as much as a week sometimes in getting that crop off earlier and allowing the soybean to do its thing and optimize yields. Oilseed, the drying of the oil seeds, they dry relatively quickly. If you're harvesting in that 12% range, around there, you're not going to have to do a whole lot of drying. But it should be stored at about 8 to 10%. That is very important. And using this system, what our research has consistently shown that total seed yield, that is the winter camelina and soybean, tends to be, and not just seed yield, but oil yield per acre as well, tends to be higher with the relay system than just growing a monocrop or single crop of soybean. As you can see in this slide, there is a little bit of yield drag with the soybean in the relay system, and that's because you've got that overlap of life cycle for a while there where you've got competition between the two crops, and that does tend to lower the yield a little bit of soybean. But we've been doing more research on this and finding out that cultivar does matter, and by using the right cultivar in the system, we're beginning to narrow that yield gap and make the yields of the relay soybean more like that of the monocrop soybean. So with that, I think I'm done. Yes, I am. And we'll be open for questions. Thank you very much.